The thick jungle air clung to Edward Malvern's skin as he hacked his way through the dense undergrowth, the weight of his rifle strapped securely to his back. The expedition had gone on longer than expected, and supplies were beginning to dwindle, but he was too close to his goal to turn back. Somewhere beyond the tangled foliage lay the fabled burial ground of the Porroh tribe, a sight spoken of only in whispers by the local guides, who had refused to accompany him further. He had dismissed their fears as primitive superstition. The Porroh people were said to be keepers of powerful magic, their witch doctors feared for their ability to inflict curses on those who wronged them. Tales of severed heads that continued to whisper secrets long after death, of spirits that stalked their victims in the night, meant nothing to him. He was a man of science, of discovery. Superstition had no place in his world. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, he finally stumbled upon it. The burial ground. Ancient stones, covered in moss and worn with age, marked the resting places of warriors and kings. A strange sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck, but he pushed it aside. He had come for proof. Proof that these people had a rich history, proof of the artifacts buried with their dead. Proof that would make his name known among scholars and explorers alike. He set to work quickly, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings on a particular stone that seemed older than the rest. It bore the image of a man with wide, staring eyes, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. Beneath the carving lay a shallow mound of earth, and Malvern wasted no time in digging. The soil was soft, almost too easy to move, as if something below was waiting for him to uncover it. His fingers brushed against something smooth and cold, a skull, but not an ordinary one. It was adorned with intricate carvings, and its hollow sockets seemed to stare directly into his soul. A chill ran down his spine, but he shook it off. He had found what he came for. The sound of rustling leaves made him turn sharply. He was not alone. A figure stepped forward from the shadows, cloaked in dark robes, a headdress of feathers and beads adorning his head. The Porroh Man. His eyes gleamed with something ancient, something Malvern could not understand. "You should not be here," the witch doctor intoned, his voice thick with an accent Malvern barely understood. Malvern straightened, brushing the dirt from his hands. "I mean no disrespect. I am an explorer, a scholar. I seek only knowledge." The Porroh Man did not move. "You have disturbed the dead. You have stolen from the spirits. There is a price." A smirk played on Malvern's lips. "I don't believe in curses." The witch doctor merely stared at him for a long moment before raising a hand and whispering something in his native tongue. The air seemed to tighten around Malvern, the weight of something unseen pressing against his chest. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the Porroh Man turned and vanished into the jungle. The silence that followed was suffocating. Malvern shook his head, brushing off the encounter as another attempt to scare outsiders away. He placed the skull carefully in his satchel and made his way back to camp, eager to examine it in better light. That night he awoke to whispers, soft, insidious murmurs that curled around his mind like smoke. He sat up, his breath coming in short gasps, his eyes scanning the darkness. The other members of his party slept soundly, undisturbed. He told himself it was the wind, a trick of the jungle. But deep down, something cold had taken root in his chest. Over the following days, the whispers grew louder. He saw things, shadows moving at the edges of his vision, shapes that dissolved when he turned his head. His dreams became plagued with visions of the Porroh Man, his eyes burning with silent judgment. The skull seemed to glow in the moonlight, its hollow sockets deep wells of darkness. Malvern tried to ignore it, but sleep began to elude him, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Then the deaths began. One by one his men fell, first, it was Hastings who vanished in the night. His body found the next morning with his throat slashed as though by invisible claws. Then Carter, who stumbled into camp, eyes wide with terror, muttering about voices in the trees before collapsing, lifeless. The remaining members of the expedition muttered among themselves, casting wary glances at Malvern, at the cursed artifact he refused to part with. He became a man haunted, his reflection twisted in ways that made no sense, his own face seeming to shift, his eyes too dark, too empty. The whispers never ceased, growing in intensity until he could no longer distinguish them from his own thoughts. He was losing himself. Desperation drove him to seek out the Porroh Man. He followed the trail back to the burial ground, his breath ragged, his skin slick with sweat. The witch doctor was waiting for him, as though he had known Malvern would return. "Make it stop," Malvern pleaded. "Tell me how to break the curse." The Porroh Man studied him with a knowing gaze. "You carry death with you. Cannot be undone." Malvern's hands trembled. "There must be a way." The witch doctor nodded slowly. "There is one." Hope flared in Malvern's chest, but it was short-lived. "The curse belongs to you now. To break it, you must return what you have stolen, and give a life in return." Malvern felt his stomach twist. A sacrifice, a life for a life. His mind raced. He had already lost most of his men. Would another death truly matter? Would it matter if it meant he could be free? The weight of the skull in his satchel felt heavier than ever as he made his way back to camp. He barely registered his men's wary stares, the hushed whispers that followed him. He had made his decision. That night, under the cover of darkness, he crept into the tent where the last of his men slept. His hands were steady as he reached for his knife. One life, just one. The whispers urged him forward, the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon him. He raised the blade. A scream shattered the silence. His victim awoke too soon, struggling, thrashing. The others rushed in, eyes wide with horror as they took in the sight of their leader, his blade slick with blood. They turned on him before he could react, their fear turning to fury. The jungle swallowed his cries. Days later, a lone figure emerged from the trees, his once proud stance reduced to a broken shuffle. His clothes were torn, his body wasted, but his mind was lost. The Porroh Man watched from the shadows as Edward Malvern stumbled back to the burial ground, clutching the skull to his chest like a child with a toy. He sank to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please," he whispered, "take it back. Take it back." The Porroh Man merely turned and vanished once more, leaving Malvern alone with the skull, alone with the whispers that would never cease. The curse had taken root, and there was no escape. Only madness remained.